Of course, this morning we have joining us on AAIS Pulse, Commissioner Mike Chaney from the great state of Mississippi. Commissioner, you are one of my favorite commissioners. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Robin, for allowing me to be on with AAIS. Thank you so much.
We're going to dive right in because there's some things that you and I have talked about in the past and experienced in the past, and not just drawing on my experience at AAIS, but also going back to my days as a regulator in the state of Florida. One of the first things I remember working on once I got to AAIS as a statistical reporter was the work that we tried to help you do on the auto working group around collecting some data for that group around affordability, accessibility, those types of issues. That was, to me, a great disappointment. It was too hard. It, in the end, not sure gave you everything you needed. And I wanted to kind of go back to that and say, that was one of those catalyst moments for me around data collection and how difficult it was. And I wanted to kind of get, your experience there or other experiences that have kind of shaped or formed some of the opinions you might have around data collection in the insurance industry.
Well, Robin, the first thing I would say is the experience with the auto study group that began actually from a meeting in NAIC meeting in New Orleans was that we did not have all the tools we really needed to do a perfect data call, or if it's such thing as a perfect data call, one. And number two, it was hard to do a data call and keep the information aggregated together and to avoid somebody misusing the data. And that was my major concern. I was chair of the C committee at the time that happened. And we were just becoming familiar with something called blockchain, which would come out with Bitcoin. So it was a new concept and many commissioners just truly did not understand it, including myself. We weren't even sure what artificial intelligence was at the time, and I'm still not sure I understand that, but it seems to me like a lot of people have artificial intelligence instead of real intelligence sometimes. But the challenges of proxy discrimination were always present. We didn't call it proxy discrimination back at that time, but we had something just the opposite of that and called optimization of pricing, which some companies were using, and we quickly stopped that at the commissioner's level. And I began to look at data collection as a tool that needed to be managed to protect consumers and company proprietary information. As you may recall, the auto study group had a lot of concerns about the data being misused by groups outside of regulators or regulatory agencies, and that did happen, but we were able to kind of contain all the data, keep confidentiality where it needed to be, and provide the data to the groups that wanted it on the auto study group.
Thank you. Yeah, the hard part to me was that, first of all, it is hard. It can't be repeated easily, right? You can't just go back and say, oh, let's do that again. Nor would anybody want to, I think, after that experience. But, that, to me, that started me thinking about, especially around the privacy issues, because what became apparent is that in order for regulators to be able to start using some of the information that comes out of this, is that they're going to have an ability to look at more granular pieces of data, but not expose that data. And so that was kind of the beginning of blockchain for us, or looking at using blockchain for regulatory reporting. And your staff members, you had Andy Case and Ryan Blakeney participating from the very beginning in our design thinking sessions in how we would approach looking at using a blockchain technology to use it for regulatory reporting. And I know that they've come back and they've talked to you about some of these things. As they've come back and reported progress, what do you think are kind of some of the most important things to try to incorporate as we change regulatory reporting?
Well, when you look at all the regulatory reporting that's required, we think, at least I think, and a lot of commissioners think just like I do, that we've got to have industry buy-in will be necessary. Insurers need to understand that the benefits to them are just as true as they are to the regulator. And understand that our interest in blockchain isn't just about what we feel blockchain can do for us as regulators. We all understand that if we're going to benefit in some way, the efficiencies gained by using blockchain and openIDL, and I know a lot of people say, what's IDL? It's interactive data language, and that's been around for a while. That actually started in the 70s, but it only came prevalent with blockchain. That can lead to quicker, more robust reporting, which can allow us to respond very rapidly to the needs and issues we all face. And this is about consumer protection and insurance servicing. This isn't a tool that simply benefits regulators. It benefits both sides of the coin. Now, I want to say that we're looking at automobile rates and discounts during COVID-19, especially through 2021. And that's an issue with a lot of consumer groups. So I suspect there'll be some data calls as we begin to see reports come in for the year closing out 2021. So we'll see if there was any gouging or price gouging or unlawful profiteering to try to satisfy some of the consumer groups.
Yeah, I think that's always a concern. I mean, that's the regulator's job, right? To make sure that the consumer is protected and has fair access and can and gets the claims paid, right, at the other end of the day.
Well, Robin, that's quite true. And I will say this, that unfortunately, a lot of people do not understand that our system of government and our economies depend upon capitalism and the ability to make a profit. And you can't say, we don't want you to make a profit in the automobile insurance industry. And some consumer groups want what they want without any rhyme or reason as to the effect that it would have on the economy if they get everything free. So somewhere there's a balancing act, and we as regulators have to be very careful not to overstep the line in either side.
That, that is very insightful, because I think that people need to remember that, right? They're making a profit is not an evil thing, and that we need to make sure that we're tempering what we do as regulators, looking at the greater whole. We want insurance to be able to pay those claims. We want to be able to give the right rate, as an industry. And I think there's a lot of the industry that is particularly focusing on the data that they have that could change some other things. And as we have been working with the state of Mississippi, one of the interesting things that we've kind of put forward with openIDL, and for us, openIDL was Open Insurance Data Link, but it's all the same. It's about the data, right? One of the things that we've seen is coming out of that is working with the Mississippi's emergency management and your office to see if we can connect insurance data back into when it's really needed, right after a flood event or after a CAT event, so that the process that your state goes through with FEMA and some of the other integrations, that we can actually start to use some of that really important insurance data when we are boots on the ground, right, are able to make some decisions using that. How do you think that's going to shape what we do in the future, maybe around mitigation or some of the other things we do, using that data for response and relief to the consumers as the event unfolds, and then further out, right? How do we change our behavior? Because my motto has always been, the only way we're going to effectuate real change is that if we can look at the risk and start to reshape the risk. And I think insurance companies play a very important role with the consumer and helping them understand their risk and mitigate it in two ways. One, by having an insurance product to respond, but to also look at how they institute mitigation efforts to reshape their risk. How do you think that's going to, what's the importance to you guys around that response?
Well, what's important for us as regulators is to have the proper tools to try to see what damages are caused, not only by flood, but for an example, tornadoes, to get a real feel of how much damage you may have on a tornado that, let's say, from an E3 that's on the ground for 25 or 30 miles, and it's got a path of maybe 200 or 300 yards wide. You can pretty well figure out real quick what your damage is going to be, depending upon whether you're in a neighborhood or you're dealing with chicken houses in South Mississippi or Florida or Georgia, or wherever you are. But we did not have the tools that we needed. And within our shop, with Andy's side of the consumer division and David Browning's side on examination, Well, we looked at a company called Crisis Track, and we took it. We didn't have the money in the budget to buy Crisis Track, but it was a pretty unique tool. We went to FEMA, and FEMA said, we like this. Let us look at it. We formed a partnership, and all of a sudden FEMA said, this is so good, we want to buy it ourselves and let y'all use it. So we ended up getting MEMA and FEMA to kind of fund what we were doing on Crisis Track. And it's been used, as you well know, by a lot of companies now and a lot of agencies. So we early on, we recognized that Crisis Track could be a useful tool, not only for our states, emergency management agencies, partners, but also for us as well. And that includes people like the Highway Patrol and law enforcement agencies. I'm the state fire marshal in my state, so we use it as a de facto tool, trying to look at where we need to send first responders in case you have a catastrophic event. And the pieces that we were missing, however, was an understanding of what damaged properties were insured and which ones were uninsured. And by arranging a meeting between the minds of Crisis Track and AAIS, which is your group actually, we got a collaboration was born where we feel that not only can we address this missing link, but we can see huge opportunities now for future enhancements of the consumer claim experience. Insurers are seeing opportunities to be able to obtain loss assessment information on their risk before the claim is even reported by the policyholders. And you can get down into what you call the granular level of GIS. That's really important to us, especially if we're going to start dealing with flood issues. And this can be very beneficial for a triage of losses and determining applications of the ALE, adjusted loss and living expense. So that's a big deal. In Louisiana, there's a lawsuit now or a directive by their commissioner against some companies for not paying ALE because the state did not declare a mandatory evacuation. So until we get some legislation along these lines, we're saying to all of our emergency management people that use Crisis Track, and they may be in cooperation with AARS or other groups, that declare a mandatory evaluation, whether it's necessary or not, so at least people can get ALE if power's out for 2 weeks. You can't stay in your home at that point. So we see opportunities for first notice of loss to the companies, providing electronic data in real time as damage assessments are completed. And you can imagine a world wherein a policyholder calls us and says something to the effect of, I've got a claim, and the insurers must explain that they're already receiving notice of the loss and have begun working on it. So we can say to that consumer, look, XYZ company knows you've got a loss and they're already working on it. We've already got it to them electronically through the new tools that we have. So in situations where the policyholder is still displaced, these claims can be reported much quicker rather than weeks after the policyholder is able to return to the damaged home. Yeah. It's a pretty quick tool for us.
Yeah, no, and Crisis Track is become a really great partner, and that I think is probably the crux of what we are trying to build with openIDL is that they're a business just like any other business, and they're in the business of making money as they're doing it. But as they're doing it, they understand that helping us build this network underneath allows them to do more and offer more services. And that's really what we're trying to build with openIDL, is that network, that community that understands that the ability to share this data or to interact with this data in a new way that's protected, right? It never has to leave the insurance companies behind, their protected space, but to be able to use that data to do some really incredible things around disaster relief. I want to pivot real quickly because you mentioned something earlier that I want to talk a little more about with you, and just we'll kind of finish up with it, is that, as you've interacted on some of these issues around data, people want to use it to tell the story they want to tell sometimes. And so the misuse of data or using data to make a case or move something in a direction one way or the other, it is true. And one of the things that I often hear as responses to, okay, well, if if I put this more granular data in this place, and yes, I understand it's private, and yes, I understand, I have more protections, but if it's there, it means that a regulator can ask more pointed questions than they perhaps did in the past. And they're very frightened to some level around, about saying yes, because of because they have to worry, or they are worried about, is the baby really ugly, right? Did you ask the question where the answer is not going to be necessarily favorable, and that puts them in a position where they're on the defensive. So, you've kind of mentioned that earlier. What will you say to those companies that are afraid to kind of take that step about the response from a regulatory environment? How do you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I tell them is don't be concerned and afraid of what we're trying to do. We're not asking companies to provide us with new data that we wouldn't normally request for a data call. We're just simply asking them to provide the data in a different format from what they've provided it to us before. So openIDL doesn't remove the discussion we've had around the data that we request and the reason for the request. openIDL isn't just for regulators. It's also for the companies. It's for all of us. You got to look at it that way. Look at the collaboration of work around the POC between Crisis Track, MEMA, and that's the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency here in Mississippi, and AAIS. And ask yourself as an insurer, how can this work and transform the way our service comes to you to service your claim? It's pretty simple. The first insurer who captures this can have a huge competitive advantage, but it's available to everyone. So the first ones that use it are going to have a great competitive advantage.
I agree. I think that, when I've talked about this in the past with Andy Case from your office, I mean, he's always stressed it's really important that insurance companies understand they have a benefit from this. And I think this is one of those proof of concepts around disaster response. And we're looking now at how we help both California, who's looking at openIDL, and how we help Colorado and some others, and Crisis Track is involved there, is how we start to help build that for them, right? How do we help give that insight to allow the insurance companies to be able to participate in such a way that gives that benefit? It doesn't, we're going to get to a better place where we're reporting data. It is way too hard right now. As I've looked at some of these, responsive requests for data calls, I actually helped create a few in the state of Florida. It is hard. That is not an untrue statement by some of the companies that it's difficult to do. But this is a way that we can help our consumer, that we can realize gain as individual insurance companies and competitive advantage, and really help to respond to some of the things that I think is really important for our industry to do, right? Insurance is the reason, it's the backbone of an economy. And we have to, as insurers and an insurance community, we have to figure out how we respond better, how we do more, and how we can do that. And so everyone wins.
So Robin, I would say that IDL, the interactive data language that we're trying to use in data collections, levels a playing field for all the insurers that are out there selling a product, whether it be health insurance, or whether it be P&C, or even life insurance to that degree. So what I would say to the companies is this: get involved. There's work to be done on everybody's level. Data standards need to be established at some level, and I think you will see some of that coming around fairly quick and agreed upon not only by the companies, but by the companies that provide the data service for the regulators. And in many cases, regulators do not have the resources to do the data calls themselves, and they must use outside sources. So we are asking people to come to the table and be part of the discussion. I want to emphasize that you've got to be at the table to be part of the discussion, or you don't have any right to criticize what we're trying to do. And the regulator working groups that we have on the C committee, the D committee, and even on the B committee are inviting other states to come in and be a part of what we're trying to do. If you're an insurer, you got to join the discussion with us, not at one of these committee levels and at NAIC and through AAIS. We all want something that works for us. Find out how openIDL can help you and become part of the work that defines how we'll use it. That's a big deal. And I can assure you that with the leadership change that we've just had in NAIC, we're probably going to see some data calls that we haven't had before occur, I should say, during 2022.
Yeah, I agree. Commissioner, thank you again so much for being with us today. It is, we really appreciate the work that your staff has done to help us move openIDL into the Linux Foundation, where it is an open source, where we can keep doing this collaboration, and that we will build some pretty incredible things in participation with the work at the NAIC and the committees there. And then the work that we're doing over in openIDL to help that collaboration mature. And we start to get those data standards and start to understand how we can change data reporting for the insurance industry.
I should mention on closing that we are a part of the Linux. We've joined that group also. So that's a big deal for us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big deal for us as well, because that, we do great work at the NAIC, but this is a place where the people who actually handle that data can come to the table and sit with the regulator and sit with the other third parties like Crisis Track and start to understand exactly what is needed and have empathy for everyone's situation when we're trying to build something, that will support, many great things to happen through the NAIC and the state of Mississippi. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Robin.
And next we have up talking about openIDL, George Bradner from Connecticut, the Connecticut DOI. Hi, George. How are you today?
Doing very well, Robin. How are you?
Great. Thank you. As we were just discussing with Commissioner Chaney, we were talking about the openIDL and its importance as a network, its importance as growing this kind of community around regulatory reporting and starting fresh. I just wanted to kind of start out by, what are your impressions around that? Because Connecticut has been a great partner as well with the openIDL and as a member of the Linux Foundation as we move forward. How do you see that progress? What do you see us doing, and how's that important to Connecticut?
I think there's been very good progress, Robin. Would I like to have seen more progress? Sure. But I understand this is the insurance industry and that we're talking about. So I get it. However, InsurTech and big data are rapidly changing the landscape. And I see this as an exciting period for the industry and regulators. I'm pleased that the travelers in Hartford, two of our domestics here in Connecticut, are part of the openIDL team. And as we are, and understand there are other companies engaging in this discussion, which is very good. So I'm really hopeful that we'll continue to move this and make some more progress in 2022.
Yeah, Commissioner Chaney was great to point out that, the NAIC has groups to work on this, but the openIDL, and Mississippi is also a member of the openIDL project. That he extended his invitation to others to join and help us work on the data standards and the proofs of concepts around that. And I'm sure you would echo that.
Oh, most definitely. We're working right now with several states doing some data definitions and on statistical reporting. And the more states we get involved in this and more companies we get involved in this, it's going to make a much better product. And really, it's as I said, this is really exciting.
Thanks, George. That's not the only technology we've been working on, especially with the Connecticut Department. Over the past year or so, we've been working with machine learning tools and looking at how we use those types of things for compliance filings, because part of this whole dynamic around dealing with big data, dealing with all these things that are coming, is that we need the ability to change and get new products to market quicker. That's always going to be, something that we need to make sure that we're working with the departments on, is introducing this new technology so you can see how it will affect filings going through your office. So let's talk a little bit about that, about our use of the Kira machine learning AI for work on compliance. What problem did you see us trying to solve with the work on our proof of concept?
First I'd like to say that, we know industry is taking full advantage of, machine learning and AI, and we too, as regulators, need to do this. As I said earlier, this is really exciting time with InsurTech. And, when you and I spoke a while back, I had told you about a claims made audit process that we had in place at the department, where we exempt a certain line of business, professional liability line of business, that has claims made language in those contracts. Companies are still required to submit those contracts to the department, but we do an audit process. And it's a very manual intensive effort on the part of the department. This meant we had to improve the time it takes to complete the claims made audits. Claims made submissions are for the most part exempt. As I said, the task of, is daunting, going through these filings, and it takes approximately 6 months from when we start an audit to complete the audit. And it takes the examiners away from, reviewing everyday filings that are coming in. So there's this always, tug of war that we're having of making sure we're doing these audits and without creating a backlog, within our department. So it was very frustrating.
Yeah, what we talked about, when we were discussing the right proof of concept, what we wanted to do and coming to the checklist was, how do we prove that we can use machine learning to speed up a compliance review or help the department to go through some of these activities? And I think we chose that because there was very little risk, right, to the department. If we failed, you were going to be in a situation where it didn't, there was no other secondary effect and a proof of concept. But thankfully, I think we did very well on this proof of concept, and we're able to show that we actually could do a type of compliance review using machine learning. So tell us a little bit about, how that helps you. What are some of the things you saw as sometimes secondarily, primary results, and then kind of secondarily for the proof of concept?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we have a checklist that has to be completed for all filings, claims made filings. And, it's pretty straightforward, and it pretty much, walks a company through what our, regulatory requirements are. But believe it or not, as many of my fellow regulators would probably understand, many times, while they say yes to a certain condition within within our regulation, when you get down to it and you actually have to search through the filing to find the condition, it wasn't compliant. And the machine learning, allows the department to streamline that audit process and use the system for initial submission review. It has yielded other regulatory issues such as patterns and trends of various companies. And it has tremendously sped up the review process. And so quickly lasers in on, the conditions within a contract. It could be a 700-page contract, but we're really focusing in on, does this contract meet our claims made regulations at this time? Once we can seal that up and are comfortable with that, then it frees up the examiner's time to look at other areas of the contract to make sure there aren't concerns that we may have for consumers that are using the products. So, that, blocking and tackling that took up so much time in the beginning of the process has been completely expedited by the system, doing that review in a very expeditious process that it takes minutes and not days.
One of the things that we've always talked about is that neither one of us think that machine learning AI is going to replace people in the review. We still need smart people. We still need discernment. But one of the things that I think that we talked about was that consistency and being able to pass on that knowledge to newer members of your department as you're training or trying to to give that level of consistency. So I think that's a really important point. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen you might use that inside of your department?
Yes, it's using it within our department has been really beneficial. And you touched on one of the big things we're concerned about as a department, and I know other departments are facing the same issue, is the institutional knowledge that we have within our department is over 300 years worth of insurance experience. And as I sat there looking at, how are we going to replace that? You can't really replace that. But the machine learning and using Kira, we're training the system on how to review these filings. And when we bring on new people, which we just recently brought on a new employee, we're using the system to train that employee on claims made. And it's helping her, learn the claims made regulations and the objections that are appropriate to send on those filings when there is a non-compliant issue. So it's been very valuable on that front.
Yeah, for us, it's we see that we're able to capture some of the knowledge that only one person in the organization might have had, and start to be able to teach others in the organization what to look for. Again, it doesn't replace the need for having smart people doing this work. It's just giving some consistency in the review process and speeding up that learning curve in many cases for a new employee or new worker. I think that
that consistency, Robin, is a critical component, because I can't imagine there's a state that's listening to this that you've always had the issue of two examiners reviewing filings in a line of business, and one examiner saying, oh, this is okay for that, and another examiner saying, no, it's not okay. And so this eliminates that. This really helps bring the consistency of the review process, so that you don't have that this is okay, this is not okay. It's much more consistent, and it will bubble up those issues so that you can have those conversations. What should we be doing? And then begin training the system on what the appropriate decision is.
Right. One of the things we were going through, and my team uses this, my legal team at AAIS, we use the machine learning tool to help us around language standardization, making sure that our language is consistent throughout the different lines of business where it can be. And it's challenging because we have 50 states and all the P&C lines of business with the limits of just a few that we don't cover. So when we have change, even in one state, it could be a multi-line. And I'll give you an example. We were reviewing notice cancellation, and when you know that APCIA has a spreadsheet of how the different states statutes vary regarding, just a thing like notice of cancellation for our industry, which is a standard piece of language in every contract of every policy across all lines of business, but to see how it varies throughout the states, and how hard it is, right, to make sure that when we make a state change, that we're reflecting what is meant in that specific state. And how do we capture that knowledge and do it over and over again? Because I think that's the one thing that companies do that's very similar to the regulators. Every time we go to make that change, many times you're having to go back and recapture that knowledge about that one data point. And that's what I hope to see in the future for us, is that we have the clause library, that these provisions, as we're starting to train it, not just for language standardization, but for compliance matters, that we start to decorate these pieces of data, and we're going to turn language into data, decorate that with some information that will help us all in change management around contract language. So that, that's kind of how this pairs into how we're seeing it as the modern advisory organization, and moving us, but also helping the regulators to move that. So what do you see next for Connecticut as we look forward at the next proof of concept, or the next things we'd like to do with the machine learning tool?
Yeah, I see a lot of possibilities with it. You mentioned one of them right there on the cancellation front. For almost every line of business, there are cancellation requirements, and this could easily be programmed to, validate that a filing meets the requirements for our cancellation requirements in our state. I see other applications in other lines of business, not just P&C, life and health, financial division, wherever you have standards of, things that you look for on a consistent basis. You can use Kira to program it to look for those conditions and identify where they are met or where they are not met. So, there's a very, big horizon here. I think lots of use for Kira. I'm looking right now at possibly looking at it for, we have an automobile regulation that's just as cumbersome as our claims made regulation. So we're going to start teeing that up and looking at that. So, there's limitless possibilities, I believe.
I agree. I think one of the most important things, and first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to you, to Commissioner Mays, to your team members for helping us prove with this use case that we can use machine learning. We can use it to help with the compliance activity and the review of form filings. That's a great possibility. It opens up a lot of other things. We're hoping that we can invite other states. Part of this is around our commitment. We would like to make sure that things that we're doing is in an open source. The advisory community here, AAIS, and as a modern advisory organization, is very akin to what the work is going on with openIDL. We want to create a community that we start building these things collaboratively. We were always, as an advisory organization, meant to be a bridge between the industry and the regulatory environment. And this type of machine learning is just another way that we hope to open up those avenues so that we get a collaboration between those two entities and greater among the other participants in the insurance industry. We want to keep moving forward with that collaboration to open up new opportunities for us to use machine learning in an open source and open community. Connecticut has been an incredible partner for that. So thank you very much.
Robin, if I could just, add one thing that I think is really important as states look at, using Kira or whatever the machine learning tool might be. One of the things we've really liked about Kira is it doesn't require a lot of technical expertise. You don't have to have IT programmers to do this. I have two staff members of my examiners that review the filings, and they've been able to do this. One is technically proficient, and another one is not as strong. And both were able to, navigate the Kira system and to build out rules in the machine learning environment. So I think that's, a huge part of, why we really like, Kira in Connecticut, because we can build it and and do what we need with it.
Right. And then that's the important part about any of these technology projects is that the business side has to define the requirements, right? You have to be able to change those requirements when you see that there's something that you need to respond to. It has to be nimble, has to be an agile environment so that you can change. We want to be, as we propose to in a number of states, we'll house the technology, the license for the regulators. We already have a couple of our member companies. And the unique thing about this is we can then export that learning, the provision tools, the provision training that you've helped build, and then the other that we've built internally at AAIS. We can start having other companies insurance companies be able to pick that up so they can do a review and before you even send it to you as a state, start to use and utilize some of that learning so their filings are fast for them, right? That they've already done the heavy lifting as far as looking at making sure that Connecticut will be okay. And that's that's part of the value of this, is the regulator is the one contributing to the learning, because it has to be right for you, or it doesn't matter in that sense for the compliance filing. So we really appreciate all that work. Thank you for all that you guys have done. You've got a great team there. We want to keep working and invite other states to the table and start telling us how we can help them train for compliance matters as well. Thank you for joining us today, George. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Robin. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed working with your team, and there's a lot more to do. So we're looking forward to continuing the progress.
Please come back at the top of the hour when our own Mike Payne welcomes renowned research scientist Phil Klotzbach from Colorado State University for a discussion on climate risk and a whole bunch more.